Eleanor Whitfield tore the veil off her own head and threw it into the dirt. 3 hours. She had waited 3 hours on those chapel steps for a carriage that was never coming for a man who had already counted her worth and found it insufficient. The wedding guests were gone. The reverend was gone. The flowers someone had tied to the chapel door had already begun to wilt in the Virginia heat. She stood in the middle of the empty road in her mother's altered wedding dress, and she made a decision. She was done waiting for anyone to come rescue her life. If you've ever been left standing alone when someone promised they'd stay, this story is for you. Subscribe to our channel, follow Eleanor all the way to the end, and drop your city in the comments. I want to see how far this story travels. The road near the old Harrowfield Chapel was empty in both directions when Nathaniel Carter came around the bend, and he almost didn't stop. Almost. His horse slowed before he told it to the way horses do when something ahead of them doesn't fit the picture they expect. Nathaniel looked up from the thought he'd been turning over in his head. A ledger discrepancy, $400, unaccounted for the kind of number that didn't get lost by accident, and he saw her. A woman in a white dress standing alone in the middle of the road. Not sitting, not collapsed, standing. Her back was straight, her chin was up, and there was a torn piece of white fabric lying in the dirt at her feet that it took him a moment to recognize as a veil. She had both hands closed at her sides. He pulled his horse to a full stop. She turned at the sound of hooves, and he recognized her. Eleanor Whitfield. His jaw tightened without his permission. I knew Eleanor Whitfield, the way every man of means in Albemarle County knew her by name, by family, and by the careful social arithmetic that calculated exactly how much her name was worth against how much her family owed. The Whitfields were old Virginia stock. Good blood, bad books. Thomas Whitfield had been borrowing against tomorrow for 15 years, and tomorrow was running out. And Eleanor Whitfield was supposed to be married this morning. To Charles Montgomery. Nathaniel dismounted. She watched him come without moving an inch. There was something in her face that was past the kind of expression a person puts on. Not composed exactly, but controlled the way a person gets controlled when they've already spent their grief and what's left is just the hard floor of what actually is. He stopped 6 feet from her and took off his hat. "Miss Whitfield," he said. "Mr. Carter." Her voice was level as a plank. "You can put your hat back on. I don't require ceremony right now." He put it back on. "Where is your ghee gone?" She said it flat, the way you say a word you've already made peace with, which meant she hadn't made peace with it at all. He left before the ceremony. His man brought a letter. A pause so small it almost wasn't there. "I was told to wait for another carriage." Nathaniel looked at this empty road, looked back at her. How long ago? 7 o'clock. He pulled out his watch. 10:30. He put the watch away. He looked at the veil in the dirt. He looked at her hands still closed at her sides. "You threw it," he said. Something flickered across her face. "I did." "Good," he said. She blinked. That was all just one blink, but it was the first unguarded thing she'd done since he rode up, and something in his chest registered it before his mind could tell it not to. "The letter," he said. "Do you have it?" She reached into a fold in her skirt and produced a folded paper without a word. He took it. 3 sentences. He read them twice, then once more slowly, the way he read anything he expected to need to remember later. "I have become aware of certain financial circumstances that make our proposed arrangement impractical. I wish Miss Whitfield no ill. I trust she will understand." He folded it on the same creases and held it out. "Keep it," she said. "Or burn it." "I'll keep it," he said, and tucked it into his coat. "Miss Whitfield, I'm going to take you somewhere you can sit down and eat something and have 5 minutes to yourself. Then I'm going to tell you something you need to hear. And then we're going to figure out what comes next." She looked at him with an expression that was measuring something he couldn't quite name. "You don't have to do any of that." "No, ma'am," he said. "I don't." A beat of silence passed between them in the summer heat. "All right," she said, and she walked to his horse like she'd made the decision for herself, and not because he'd offered it, which he was beginning to understand was probably how Eleanor Whitfield did most things. He meant to take her to the Whitfield house. He genuinely meant to. He made it as far as the fork in the road left to Whitfield land, right to Carter Estate, and he sat there for 3 full seconds with his horse pointed left, and he thought about what was waiting in that direction. The family. The relatives who'd come for a wedding breakfast. Her mother. Her father. The particular silence of a room full of people who've just understood that everything they were counting on has dissolved. He thought about Eleanor Whitfield walking into that room in this dress. He turned right. She didn't say anything for a long moment. Then, "Mr. Carter, this isn't the road to my family's house." "No, ma'am." "Where are we going?" "My estate. You need food and water and 10 minutes where nobody looks at you." He kept his eyes on the road. "After that, I'll take you wherever you want to go." Another silence, shorter this time. "That is not appropriate," she said. "No," he agreed. "It isn't." She didn't say anything else. He took that as the answer it was. When Nathaniel Carter rode into his own yard, with a woman in a wedding dress seated behind him, the yard went silent. The way yards go silent when something happens that nobody has a category for. His housekeeper. Mrs. Beale appeared in the doorway before he'd even dismounted. She was a broad, steady woman who had run Carter House for 18 years, and who Nathaniel trusted more than he trusted most men he'd known for twice that long. She took one look at Eleanor. She took one look at Nathaniel. She said nothing whatsoever. "Mrs. Beale," Nathaniel said, helping Eleanor down. "Miss Whitfield needs water, food, and a quiet room." "Yes, sir," said Mrs. Beale, and moved Eleanor toward the house with the efficient authority of a woman who understood that some situations required action first and questions later. The stable boy was staring. "You have work," Nathaniel said. The boy found his work immediately. I gave her an hour. When he knocked on the parlor door, she was sitting straight-backed in the chair nearest the window, teacup balanced correctly, saucer underneath it, hair contained into something that bore no resemblance to what it had been that morning, but was entirely contained. She had washed her face. Her eyes were clear. She looked to anyone who didn't know what to look for like a woman who was fine. Nathaniel sat across from her and folded his hands on the table. "Eleanor," he said and stopped. "Forgive me, Miss Whitfield." "Eleanor is fine," she said. "We're somewhat past formality." "Eleanor." He reached into his coat and set the letter flat between them. "Montgomery didn't leave because of your family's debt." She went very still. "What do you mean?" "I mean he knew about the debt before he proposed. I know he knew because the man he borrowed information from also came to me, hoping I'd make the same calculation Montgomery eventually did." He tapped the letter once. "He writes impractical, not impossible, not unexpected, impractical. That's a man who found a better option, not a man who discovered a problem." "A better option," she repeated, quiet and precise. "Your family's land, the acreage that backs against the river." He watched her face. "There's a survey done 2 years ago, kept quiet, that puts the timber value on that property at 3 times what anyone would estimate from looking at it. Montgomery knew about that survey. He proposed to you to get access to that land through marriage." The color in her face didn't change, but something behind her eyes did something that moved through quickly like a flame in a draft and then steadied. "And he left," she said slowly, "because someone offered him access to that land without the marriage." "That's my best guess, yes. Without the marriage." She said it again to herself this time, testing the shape of it. Then very quietly, "Who? I don't know yet." "Yet," she said. "Yet," he confirmed. She was quiet for 10 full seconds. He counted them not impatiently, just because he counted things. It was a habit he'd never broken. Then she picked up her teacup, took one small sip, set it back down with careful precision, and looked at him directly. "Mr. Carter, I am going to ask you something, and I need an honest answer." "All right." "Why are you telling me this? You could have taken me home and been done with it. You had no obligation past the ride." Her eyes were steady on his. "So why?" Nathaniel looked at the letter on the table between them. There were several true answers to that question, and he sorted through them quickly, the way he sorted through numbers, looking for the one that was both accurate and sufficient. Charles Montgomery has been a problem I've been meaning to address for some time, he said. He cost my brother considerably, not through honest business, but through the kind of arrangement that's designed to look honest until it isn't. I've been patient about it because I didn't have the right leverage. He paused. This morning he handed me leverage. I intend to use it. She waited. She knew there was more. And he said, I don't leave people on the side of the road. That's just how it is. Something shifted in her expression. Not a smile, not quite, but the space where a smile might eventually live. That's a very plain way to say a decent thing. I'm a plain-spoken man. Yes, she said. I'm beginning to see that. The talk reached him faster than he expected. James Poole, his land manager, rode in the following morning with the accounts and an expression that meant the accounts were not the only thing he was carrying. Spit it out, Poole, Nathaniel said before the man had sat down. Poole sat down. There's talk all through the county, sir, about you and Miss Whitfield. What kind of talk? 3 kinds depending on who you ask. Poole didn't fidget. Nathaniel had always appreciated that. First kind says you engineered the whole morning to steal Montgomery's bride and embarrass him publicly. Second kind says Miss Whitfield ran to you because you two had an arrangement nobody knew about. Third kind. He paused. Third kind, Nathaniel said. Third kind says Montgomery found out about the arrangement, and that's why he ran. Poole kept his face neutral. That one's got the most detail attached to it, which usually means somebody made it up. Nathaniel stood at the window with his hands clasped behind his back. Outside, the summer morning was already blazing. And Montgomery left for Richmond yesterday. His man says business. Of course. Nathaniel turned from the window. Who's telling the third story specifically? Poole named 2 names. Nathaniel filed them away. Thank you, Poole, he said. Work the accounts. I'll deal with the rest. Poole worked the accounts. Nathaniel stood at the window a moment longer, looking at nothing in particular, turning the shape of the problem in his mind. He had handled problems before. He had handled worse problems than this. But this one had a variable he wasn't used to, accounting for a second person whose choices and future were now tangled into the same knot as his own. He needed to talk to her. Her note arrived before noon, written in a hand that was so clean and controlled, it looked almost printed. Mr. Carter, I am told that your assistance has created difficulties for your reputation. I have no wish to cause harm to anyone who acted with decency toward me. Please advise me if there is anything I can do to address the situation. E. Whitfield. He read it twice. He thought about the woman who had thrown her veil into the dirt and then written this letter, that combination of fire and precision, the way she moved between them without losing either. He wrote back, Miss Whitfield, the difficulties are manageable, and I am not troubled by them. I would like to speak with you in person at your earliest convenience. I believe there is something that would benefit us both, and I would prefer to discuss it directly rather than by letter. N. Carter. Her reply came within the hour. Tomorrow. The Whitfield Library. 10 o'clock. E. Whitfield. 4 words and a time. He almost smiled. The Whitfield house was handsome and quietly neglected, the kind of place that told its story in the small things if you knew how to read them. Paint thinning at the corners of the window frames. The drive that needed attention. The garden pulled back to its center, kept alive but not thriving. Nathaniel read all of it in the 30 seconds it took him to ride up and dismount, and he filed it away without expression. Thomas Whitfield met him in the hall. He was a tall man, stretched thin by years of quiet strain, with a handshake that was still firm, and eyes that were calculating how much trust he could afford. Carter. He gripped Nathaniel's hand. I owe you a debt. No debt, Nathaniel said. I'd like to see Eleanor Miss Whitfield if she's available. Thomas Whitfield looked at him for a beat too long. She's in the library. He stepped aside. Carter. She's stronger than she looks. I know, Nathaniel said. That's why I'm here. Eleanor was standing at the window when he came in. Not sitting. Too alert to sit. She turned when she heard his step and stayed where she was, which he was learning meant she was thinking hard about something and didn't want to lose the thread. "Sit down, Mr. Carter," she said. He sat. She stayed standing for 3 more seconds. He could see her working something out, and then she sat down too, across from him, hands folded on the desk. "You have a proposal," she said. "Not a question." "I do." "Then make it." I made it. He laid it out with the directness he used for everything that mattered. No softening, no decoration, just the facts in their actual shape. The gossip wasn't stopping on its own. Her family's position was bad and getting worse. Montgomery was in Richmond moving fast, and whatever arrangement he'd made for the Whitfield timber was already being drawn into contract. If her father's creditors moved before that could be interrupted, and some of them would move, because creditors could smell a shift in a man's circumstances, the way dogs smelled weather, the land that was worth 3 times its apparent value would stop being Whitfield land. "A marriage," he said, "legal and functional. Not I want to be plain about what I'm offering. This is not a romantic proposition. It's a practical one. As my wife, your family's debt becomes a negotiating situation instead of a crisis. The land stays connected to your family because it becomes legally connected to mine. Montgomery's contract collapses because the access he sold no longer exists." Eleanor looked at him steadily across the desk. "And what do you get from this arrangement?" "A legitimate path to dismantling what Montgomery is building in Richmond," he said. "And someone who knows the Whitfield land and accounts better than I do, because I plan to make that timber mean something to your family instead of to his investors." The room was quiet. A clock somewhere in the house ticked. "I have conditions," Eleanor said. "I expected you would." She leaned forward slightly. "I work alongside you. Not for you, not under you. Alongside. I see the books. I'm consulted before decisions are made, not informed after. I have authority within the household, and within any arrangement that touches my family's property." Her eyes didn't waver. "Those aren't preferences, they're terms." "Accepted," he said. "My family stays on Whitfield land, non-negotiable." "Accepted." She paused. Her chin lifted slightly the way it had on the chapel steps, and he recognized it now. That was what Eleanor Whitfield looked like when she was about to say the thing that cost her something. "And I need you to understand," she said quietly but precisely, "that I am doing this because it is the best option available to me, and because I believe you are a man who means what he says. Not because I am desperate, not because I have no other choice." She held his gaze. "I have choices. I'm choosing this one." Nathaniel looked at her for a long moment. The morning light was coming through the library window behind her, and she sat in it like she'd chosen that chair on purpose, like she chose everything on purpose. "I understand," he said. "And for what it's worth, I'm choosing this one too. I have other options. This is the one that makes sense." Something in her expression shifted, not softened exactly, but settled. She reached across the desk and held out her hand. He shook it. Firm, clean, final. "Well then," Eleanor Whitfield said, and for the first time since he'd found her on that road, something in her voice sounded almost like solid ground. They were married at the Charlottesville courthouse 11 days later. Nathaniel had wanted to move faster. Eleanor had agreed, but she'd spent those 11 days doing something he hadn't expected, quietly, methodically working the problem before the wedding even happened. She sent letters to 2 of her father's largest creditors under her own name, representing herself as acting on the family's behalf. She reviewed every document in her father's library with the focused attention of someone who'd been waiting years for permission to touch them. She found 3 errors in recorded deed boundaries that changed the assessed value of Whitfield land by a measurable margin. Nathaniel found out about all of this from Poole, who had encountered her in Charlottesville at the land assessor's office on a Tuesday afternoon. She had a ledger, Poole said, and questions that the assessor clearly wasn't expecting. Nathaniel said nothing. He was doing the thing he did when something surprised him, in a way he hadn't budgeted for, going very still and assessing. "She's effective, sir," Poole said carefully. "Yes," Nathaniel said. "She is." The wedding itself was exactly what it needed to be, and nothing more. A justice of the peace. James Poole, and Mrs. Beale as witnesses. Because those were the two people Nathaniel trusted enough for this, and no ceremony required more witnesses than it needed. Eleanor wore blue. Not to make a statement, Nathaniel understood that, but because white was finished and Eleanor Whitfield did not go backward, she signed the register without hesitation. Her signature was the same on legal documents as it was on notes, clear, forward-leaning, every letter fully formed. Walking out into the summer afternoon, she said without looking at him, "He's heard by now." Montgomery. Nathaniel matched her pace. "Probably this morning." "What will he do?" "Something rash," Nathaniel said. "He doesn't sit still when his plans get disrupted. He improvises, and his improvisation is always louder than his planning." He glanced at her. "That's actually useful to us." "Because loud men make mistakes," she said. "Because loud men make mistakes." She nodded once, that small, precise nod he'd already catalogued. Then, "I found something in my father's deed records that I want to show you tonight. It changes the picture of what Montgomery can actually claim in Richmond, even if his contract holds." "What is it?" "A survey boundary discrepancy from 1809 that was never properly corrected. If it was corrected now, it would move 2 acres of river frontage back into Whitfield territory, and those 2 acres are where the best timber access is." She glanced at him sidelong. "The access he sold." Nathaniel stopped walking. She took 2 more steps before she realized and turned back. He was looking at her with an expression she hadn't seen from him yet. "How long have you known about that discrepancy?" he said. 2 years, she said. 2 years. I couldn't do anything about it. I had no legal standing to correct a deed record in my father's name, and my father didn't understand what it meant." She met his eyes. "I just needed someone with standing." A long beat of silence. The Charlottesville street moved around them, a wagon passing, someone calling across to a neighbor. The ordinary noise of an ordinary afternoon, with no idea what was happening in the middle of it. "All right," Nathaniel said, and he started walking again, and there was something different in his stride, something that hadn't been there before, and if Eleanor Whitfield noticed it, which she did, because she noticed everything she said, nothing about it, and kept pace beside him. That night, in the study of the Carter house, that was now in a different way, her house too, Eleanor spread the documents across the desk. The deed records, the 1809 survey, her corrected calculations, the letters she'd already sent, and she walked him through it. All of it. He didn't interrupt. He didn't redirect. He leaned forward with both elbows on the desk, and he looked at every document she put in front of him, and when he had a question, he asked it straight, and when she answered, he listened to the whole answer before he responded. It was, Eleanor thought, the most useful conversation she'd had in 2 years. "If we file the boundary correction before Montgomery's Richmond contract finalizes," she said, tapping the survey, "the access he sold doesn't exist. His investors are buying a path to timber they can't reach. And when they realize that," Nathaniel said, "they pull out. And when they pull out, Montgomery is standing in Richmond with a broken contract and no backers." He sat back. "He'll have to come back here and try to salvage something directly." "Which means he comes to us," Eleanor said. Nathaniel looked across the desk at her. "You want him to come to us?" "I want him exactly where we can see him," she said. "Where he has to make his case in front of people who know what he did. Not in Richmond behind closed doors with investors nobody here has ever met." She folded her hands. "He humiliated me publicly. It has to end publicly." Nathaniel was quiet for a moment. The lamp between them threw long shadows across the desk. Outside, the night was full of summer sounds. Insects whined through the trees, the distant sound of one of the horses moving in the stable. Eleanor, he said. She looked at him. "I want you to know something." He said it carefully, with the precision of a man choosing words the way he chose tools for fit, not display. "I've run this estate alone for 9 years. I've handled every account, every negotiation, every problem that came through that door alone. Because I stopped trusting people with anything that mattered after what happened with my brother." A pause. "What I'm saying is, this is not a situation I'm used to." She waited. "And I'm not saying that to warn you off," he said. I'm saying it because you should know that when I tell you, I'll consult you, and you'll have standing and your judgment matters in this house, I mean it. It's not something I say easily." He held her gaze. "So I'm saying it carefully." Eleanor looked at him across the desk in the lamplight. In this house she had not planned to be in beside a man she had not planned to marry, holding documents that might save her family's land and her own future. And she felt something she hadn't felt in 2 years. Not hope. Not yet. Something quieter than that. The particular stillness of solid ground under your feet after a long time of uncertain footing. "Then we understand each other," she said. "Yes," he said. "I believe we do." Mrs. Beale appeared in the doorway at 11:30 with a pot of coffee and the expression of a woman who had seen enough of life to recognize when something real was happening. She set the coffee down, said nothing, and left them to it. The house that had been silent for 9 years was alive with the sound of two people building something. Outside, Virginia breathed its summer heat into the dark. Somewhere south in Richmond, Charles Montgomery was making plans. And here in a study, lit by a single lamp, Eleanor Whitfield was already 3 moves ahead of him. The boundary correction filing took 4 days. Nathaniel knew people at the land assessor's office, not friends exactly, because Nathaniel Carter didn't collect friends the way other men did, but he knew people who respected competence and moved when a man with a clean record and a legitimate claim asked them to move. Eleanor had prepared every document herself. Every calculation, every reference to the original 1809 survey, every supporting notation written in that forward-leaning hand that left no room for ambiguity. When Nathaniel walked into the assessor's office on Wednesday morning, he carried a file so clean and complete that the clerk looked through it twice, just to find something to question, and couldn't. "We'll have this processed by Friday," the clerk said. "Thursday," Nathaniel said pleasantly. It was processed Thursday. Eleanor was sitting at the desk in the study when he came back working through a second set of documents she'd requested from the county recorder deed histories on 3 adjacent properties that bordered Whitfield land on the north. She looked up when he came in. "Thursday," he said. She set her pen down. Something moved across her face. Relief, maybe? Or the specific satisfaction of a plan executing the way it was supposed to. Then it was gone, replaced by that focused calm she wore like a second skin. "Good," she said. "Sit down. I need to show you something about the north boundary." He sat down. She showed him. The north boundary was, as it turned out, a problem they hadn't known they had. One of the 3 adjacent properties had changed hands twice in 6 years, and the second sale had included a boundary notation that conflicted with the Whitfield deed in a way that was either a clerical error or wasn't. Eleanor laid both documents side by side and pointed to the specific line. "If this notation holds," she said, "Montgomery's people could argue access through the north parcels instead of the river frontage. It would be slower and more expensive, but it would still be access." Nathaniel looked at both documents. Then he looked at Eleanor. "How long have you been at this?" he said. She glanced at the window. The light had shifted. It was later than either of them had registered. "Since 6 this morning." "Have you eaten?" A pause. "I had coffee. That's not what I asked." She looked at him with the expression of someone who has been so focused on the problem that the question feels slightly foreign. "I'll eat after me, Mrs. Beale," Nathaniel called toward the open door. Mrs. Beale appeared in approximately 4 seconds, which meant she had been nearby and had been exercising considerable restraint about it. "Sir?" "Whatever's in the kitchen," he said. "Now please." "Yes, sir." Mrs. Beale looked at Eleanor with an expression that was professionally neutral and personally satisfied and disappeared. Eleanor looked at Nathaniel. "I was going to finish the analysis first." "The analysis will keep 30 minutes, he said. "You won't think clearly if you don't eat, and I need you thinking clearly." He paused. "I need you, period, which means you take care of yourself." A silence settled between them, not uncomfortable, but weighted. Eleanor looked at the documents on his desk. Then she looked at her hands. "My father used to say the same thing," she said quietly, before he stopped looking at the books altogether. A beat. He got overwhelmed and he just stopped, and then there was nobody looking. Nathaniel said nothing for a moment. He understood more than he was going to say what it meant to be the only person in a room who was still looking. "I'm looking now," he said. "You don't have to do it alone." Eleanor was quiet long enough that Mrs. Beale came back with a plate, and the moment passed into the ordinary rhythm of the evening, and neither of them referred to it again. But it stayed in the room the way certain things do. The north boundary problem took them 2 more days to resolve, and they solved it the way they were beginning to solve most things. Eleanor finding the thread, Nathaniel pulling it through. She located a recorded survey from 1803 that predated both contested deeds and established the Whitfield boundary clearly. He took that survey to a land attorney in Charlottesville named Graves, who confirmed within an afternoon that the conflicting notation was almost certainly clerical and could be challenged successfully if it ever came to that. "Will it come to that?" Eleanor asked when Nathaniel relayed this. "Not if we move the right pieces before Montgomery gets back from Richmond," he said. "When do you think he'll be back?" "He's already back," Poole said from the doorway. Both of them turned. Poole had the expression he wore when he had information he hadn't wanted to have. He'd arrived for the morning accounts and clearly decided this was more urgent than the accounts. "Since when?" Nathaniel said. "Yesterday evening. He's staying at the Harrington Inn." Poole paused. "He had 2 men with him, not local. Richmond men from the look of them." Nathaniel and Eleanor looked at each other. "He knows about the filing," Eleanor said. "He knows about the filing," Nathaniel confirmed. "Then he's not here to negotiate," she said. "He's here to threaten." Nathaniel stood up. "Poole, keep watching. I want to know everywhere he goes and everyone he talks to." "Sir?" Poole left. Eleanor stood up too, and for the first time since Nathaniel had known her, she looked not frightened. Eleanor Whitfield did not do frightened. He was learning, but something close to braced, like a person who has been expecting a storm and has just heard the first thunder. "He's going to go to my father," she said. "Yes, my father will listen to him. He's when someone with money and confidence comes to my father and speaks with authority. My father tends to believe them. He's always been that way." She said it without bitterness, just accuracy. "Montgomery will make him an offer. Something that sounds reasonable. Something with a number attached that feels like relief. And your father will be tempted." "My father will be tempted," she said. "He loves us. He gets desperate, and desperation makes people reach for the first hand that's offered." She looked at Nathaniel directly. "I need to get to him first." "Then go," Nathaniel said. "Take the carriage. I'll send Poole ahead to watch the inn if Montgomery moves toward Whitfield land. Before you get there, Poole will ride fast, and you'll know." Eleanor was already moving toward the door. Then she stopped. "Come with me," she said. He looked at her. "Not to speak for me," she said quickly. "I'll do the talking. But my father, he needs to see that this is real. That the marriage is real and the plan is real, and there's actually something standing between him and Montgomery." She paused. "He's never believed things were solid until he could see them." Nathaniel picked up his hat. "Let's go," he said. Thomas Whitfield met them in the front room, and the calculation in his eyes when he saw them arrive together was quick and practiced, and ultimately hopeful. The arithmetic of a man who has been running from bad numbers long enough that he'd gotten good at spotting potential rescue. "Nathaniel," he said, shaking Nathaniel's hand. "Eleanor, I wasn't expecting." "We need to talk, Father," Eleanor said, and there was something in her voice that was not harsh, but was not asking, and Thomas Whitfield, to his credit, heard it. "Sit down," he said. They sat. Eleanor laid it out. She was clear and precise, and she didn't soften the edges her father needed to understand the full shape of the situation, not a version of it, calibrated for comfort. She explained what Montgomery had done what the timber survey said, what the Richmond contract likely contained, and what would happen to the family's land if he were allowed to execute that contract. Thomas Whitfield listened with his hands folded on his knees and his face doing complicated things. "He came to see me," he said when Eleanor finished. "Yesterday." Eleanor went still. "He was already here. Before you were married," Thomas said. The day after the chapel." He looked at his hands. He told me he was sorry about what happened, that it was a misunderstanding, that he still wanted to find a way to help the family. He paused. He offered to pay off 2 of the largest debts outright, in exchange for a land access agreement. "Did you sign anything?" Nathaniel said, and his voice was very quiet. Thomas looked up. "No. I told him I needed time to think." The breath Eleanor had been holding came out slow and controlled. "How long did you tell him you needed?" "A week." Nathaniel looked at Eleanor. Eleanor looked at Nathaniel. A week was enough. Barely, but enough. "Father," Eleanor said, leaning forward, "listen to me carefully. He is not offering to help you. He is trying to buy what the filing has already protected. If you sign anything he puts in front of you, you will hand him access to land whose timber value is 3 times what he'll tell you it is, and the debts he pays off will be recovered from us within 5 years. She held her father's gaze. "He abandoned me on a chapel step. He did it because I stopped being useful to him. The moment you sign those papers, you'll stop being useful too." Thomas Whitfield looked at his daughter for a long time. "What do I tell him?" he said. "Tell him you need more time," Eleanor said. "Tell him nothing has been decided, and do not sign a single thing until I've read it first." He nodded. Slowly, then more firmly. "All right," he said. "All right, Eleanor." She stood up. Nathaniel stood with her. At the door, Thomas Whitfield caught his son-in-law's arm. "She's always been the one," he said, quiet enough that it was meant for Nathaniel only. "I just didn't know how to get out of her way." Nathaniel looked at the man, this tall, thin, exhausted man who had loved his family and failed them by degrees, and was trying now to do one thing right. "Get out of her way," Nathaniel said. "That's all she needs." Montgomery made his move 3 days later, not toward Thomas Whitfield, toward the county. He held what could only be described as a social campaign, attending every gathering, every church social, every merchants' meeting in Charlottesville, and everywhere he went, he told a version of events that was just believable enough to be dangerous. He didn't accuse Eleanor or Nathaniel directly. He was too smart for that. He expressed concern. He expressed confusion. He told people with a furrowed brow and a lowered voice that he worried about Miss Whitfield, that the circumstances of her marriage had been so sudden, so unusual, that he couldn't help but wonder if she had been given real choice in the matter. It was elegant, Nathaniel had to admit. It was the kind of thing that was almost impossible to fight directly because there was nothing specific enough to refute. You couldn't argue against a worried expression. He heard about it from 3 different sources before Eleanor heard about it, and he was still deciding how to tell her when she appeared in the study doorway at 7 in the morning with a look that told him she already knew. "Mrs. Aldrich told my mother at the market yesterday," Eleanor said. "And Mrs. Aldrich heard it from the Harrington woman who sat next to Montgomery at the Prestons' dinner on Tuesday." "How much did she tell your mother?" "Enough." Eleanor came into the room and sat down, not in the chair across from his desk, but in the chair beside it, which she'd quietly migrated to sometime in the past week, and which Nathaniel had noticed without comment. "He's implying you coerced me, that the speed of the marriage suggests I wasn't free to say no." "Does your mother believe it?" A pause. "My mother believes what frightens her. Right now she's frightened." Eleanor looked at her hands. "She asked me directly this morning if I was all right, if I was happy." "What did you tell her?" Eleanor was quiet for a moment. It was not the usual quiet, not the calculating pause, or the processing pause. This was something else. Something that Nathaniel, in the 3 weeks he had spent learning the geography of Eleanor Whitfield's silences, recognized as the real kind. "I told her that I was exactly where I chose to be," she said, "and that I had chosen it with my eyes open and my full mind engaged, and that no one had moved me anywhere I didn't walk myself." Was that enough for her? "No," Eleanor said. "But it was true, so it's what she gets." Something moved in Nathaniel's chest that he didn't look at directly. It was becoming a habit, that particular movement, whenever Eleanor said something that was exactly and precisely itself, no more and no less than what it was. It happened, and he had taken to filing it under not relevant right now and moving on. "He's going to escalate," Nathaniel said. The social pressure is the soft opening. He's testing what sticks. When enough of it sticks, he'll try something harder. The letters, Eleanor said. Nathaniel looked at her sharply. What letters? She met his eyes. Before we were married, before any of this, I wrote to Charles Montgomery twice. When we were engaged. Personal letters. Nothing inappropriate but personal. The kind of letters you write to someone you believe you're going to spend your life with. A beat. He will have kept them, and he'll use them to suggest a prior emotional entanglement, Nathaniel said. A relationship that predates you and me. Something that makes the scandal look like a love triangle instead of a business maneuver. Yes. Nathaniel put his pen down. He sat back. He did the thing he did when a problem required not just solving, but outmaneuvering. He looked at the ceiling for 4 seconds, which Eleanor had learned to recognize as serious thinking and not distraction, and she waited. Can you remember what you wrote? He said. Most of it, clearly. Were there anything in any phrase, any sentence that could be taken out of context to suggest you wanted to leave with him? That you were unhappy, that you were planning something? Eleanor thought carefully. No, I was trying to know him. I asked questions. I told him about the estate. I described the land. She paused. I told him once that I hoped he would come to love this county the way I did. That I hoped we might build something here together. That, Nathaniel said, is not a compromising letter. That is a letter from a woman who was making an honest attempt at a life she'd been promised. He looked at her. If he produces those letters publicly, they don't make you look foolish. They make him look like a man who walked away from someone who trusted him. Eleanor blinked. It was the second unguarded thing he'd ever seen from her, and like the first one at the chapel, it was over almost before it happened. I hadn't thought about it that way, she said. He's counting on you to be ashamed of them, Nathaniel said. Don't be. She looked at him for a moment, with an expression that was complicated. Layered in a way he was only beginning to have the vocabulary for. You're not what I expected, she said. When this started. What did you expect? Someone using me as a means to an end. Politely, but using me. She held his gaze. You consult me. You wait for my reasoning before you decide. She stopped. Chose the next words carefully. You treat the work I do as work, not as assistance. It is work, he said. You found the boundary survey. You prepared the correction filing. You went to your father before I had decided on the right approach, and you handled it better than I would have. A pause. I'd be a fool not to treat that as work. Most men would, she said, treat it as assistance. Most men, Nathaniel said, would have left you on the side of the road. The words sat there between them plain and unadorned, exactly what they were. Eleanor looked at the desk. She picked up her pen. She put it down again. I'm glad you didn't, she said. Quiet. Simple. The way she said things that cost her something. Nathaniel said nothing. But something about the room felt different after that, the way rooms sometimes do, when the air in them shifts and nobody opens a window. Montgomery's next move came from a direction neither of them expected. Not from the county gossip, not from the letters, not from Thomas Whitfield, from Nathaniel's brother. Daniel Carter arrived on a Wednesday morning without sending word ahead, which was how Daniel always arrived. Sudden, slightly breathless, with the energy of a man who had made his decision on the way and hadn't stopped to reconsider it. He was 4 years younger than Nathaniel, broader through the shoulders, and he wore his feelings on the outside of his face in a way that Nathaniel had spent a lifetime finding both exhausting and quietly enviable. Nathaniel heard him in the hall and came out of the study, and Daniel stopped when he saw his brother and said without preamble, Montgomery came to see me. The hall went very quiet. When? Nathaniel said. Last Friday, in Lynchburg. He came to my office. Daniel looked past Nathaniel into the study where Eleanor was visible at the desk, and he corrected his volume accordingly. Is there somewhere? Study, Nathaniel said. Eleanor is my wife, and she hears everything relevant to this household. If what Montgomery said qualifies, she'll hear it now. Daniel looked at him. Something in his expression adjusted surprise, maybe, or the recalibration of someone who expected one thing and got another. He walked into the study. Eleanor looked up. She looked at Daniel. She looked at Nathaniel. She read the shape of the situation in approximately 3 seconds and set her pen down. "Daniel Carter," she said. "I've heard about you." "Good things, I hope," Daniel said, and he had enough natural warmth that even distressed he was trying. "Honest things," Eleanor said. "Sit down." He sat down. He told them what Montgomery had said. Montgomery had gone to Daniel with a proposition. He had told Daniel that the Carter estate was being compromised by the marriage, that Eleanor Whitfield's family debt had been inherited along with the wife, that Nathaniel had acted impulsively and emotionally, and that Daniel, as a family member with a legitimate interest in the Carter holdings, ought to consider whether the situation was in the family's long-term interest. He had offered to help Daniel in vague but financially suggestive terms explore his options. "I was suggesting I contest your decisions," Daniel said to Nathaniel, as he used the phrase family oversight. "He was suggesting you could challenge the marriage," Eleanor said. Daniel looked at her. "He said that if your father's debts were significant enough, a court might view the arrangement as financially coerced," Eleanor said. "Level precise. He's trying to build a case that I married for financial protection rather than free choice, which would allow the marriage to be challenged, which would undo the filing." She looked at Nathaniel. "He's been planning this since Richmond." "What did you tell him?" Nathaniel said to Daniel. Daniel looked almost offended. "I told him that my brother's wife was his own business, that I had no interest in family oversight of a man who has run the estate better than anyone alive, and that he could take his proposition, and—" He glanced at Eleanor. "I declined politely." "But you came here," Eleanor said. "Because he's not done," Daniel said. "Whatever I said, he was making notes. He's looking for a pressure point, and if it's not me, he'll find another one." He leaned forward. "He mentioned your foreman, Nathaniel. Briggs. He knew Briggs by name, and he knew Briggs had been with the estate for 6 years. He mentioned it casually, like it was nothing. It wasn't nothing." Nathaniel went still. Briggs had been with him 6 years. Loyal, efficient, hard-working. He had no reason to believe otherwise. But Montgomery didn't mention a name casually. Montgomery never mentioned anything casually. "Thank you," Nathaniel said to Daniel, and he meant it as a full sentence. Daniel stayed for supper. He and Eleanor spoke across the table with the ease of two people who had independently decided the other was worth talking to. And Nathaniel watched the conversation from his end of the table and thought about Briggs and about the fact that Montgomery was not improvising anymore. This was not rash noise from a man whose plans had been disrupted. This was strategy. Careful, quiet, multi-directional strategy. The kind a man builds when he is serious, which meant they needed to be more serious. After Daniel retired for the evening, Nathaniel went to find Briggs. The foreman was in the barn, which was where he often spent his evenings checking equipment, making sure the next day's work was staged properly. He was a thick-set man in his 40s, methodical and self-contained, and he looked up when Nathaniel came in without any particular alarm. "Sir," he said. "How long have you known Charles Montgomery?" Nathaniel said. No preamble. He watched Briggs the way he watched ledger numbers for the micro moment of reaction before the managed response. Briggs's expression shifted. It was small. It was fast. It was enough. "I worked for him," Briggs said after a pause that was 2 beats too long. "Before I came here, 3 years. You didn't tell me that when I hired you. You didn't ask." It was true. Nathaniel hadn't asked. He'd checked references, good ones, legitimate ones, and hired based on work record. He hadn't asked for every previous employer going back 15 years. "Has he contacted you?" Nathaniel said. Briggs was quiet. "I need a straight answer," Nathaniel said. "Not to punish you, because I need to know what I'm working with." Another pause. Then, "He sent a letter, 3 weeks ago." Briggs looked at the wall behind Nathaniel. "Said he'd heard I was working Carterland. Said he hoped I was well. Asked me to let him know if anything irregular came to my attention." "Did you write back?" "No, sir." "Did you tell anyone?" "No, sir." Nathaniel looked at him for a long moment. The barn was quiet around them, the particular quiet of a place full of breathing animals and old wood. "You'll give me the letter," Nathaniel said. "Yes, sir." "And if he contacts you again, you'll tell me before you respond." "Yes, sir." Nathaniel turned to go, then stopped. "Briggs, why didn't you write back?" A pause. When Briggs answered, his voice was rough around the edges in a way it hadn't been before. "Because I know what kind of man he is," he said. "And I know what kind of man you are. And I reckon when you work for someone fair for 6 years, you know which direction your loyalty's supposed to go." Nathaniel looked at the foreman for a moment. Then he nodded once, that same small final nod he'd picked up from Eleanor. Or maybe she'd picked it up from him. Or maybe it was just what happened when two people spent enough time in the same rooms. "Good night, Briggs," he said. "Good night, sir." He found Eleanor still in the study. She looked up when he came in, read his expression, and waited. He told her about Briggs. She was quiet through all of it. When he finished, she said, "The letter. If he has it, that's evidence of contact, of intent." "Yes." "Can it be used legally?" "Possibly. It depends on what's in it." He sat down. "But even if it can't be used in court, it can be used to show a pattern. Montgomery, reaching out to anyone connected to this estate. Your father, my brother, my foreman. That's not coincidence. That's a coordinated effort to find a weak point." "He hasn't found one," Eleanor said. "No." "He's going to keep looking." "Yes." She looked at the desk. Her hands were flat on the surface, very still. "Then we need to stop playing defense," she said. "We've been protecting. Correcting filings, managing gossip, watching who he talks to. That's all necessary, but it's reactive." She looked up at Nathaniel. "We need to find what he's actually afraid of. Not what he wants. What he's afraid of losing." Nathaniel leaned back in his chair and looked at the ceiling for 4 seconds. "The Richmond investors," he said. "The Richmond investors," she confirmed. "His contract may be broken by the filing, but his reputation with those men isn't. Not yet. If they're still considering working with him, if they still believe he has access to something valuable, then he has room to maneuver." She paused. "If they knew what he actually did. The abandoned bride. The fraudulent representation of access he didn't have. The letters to a hired foreman." "They'd pull out entirely," Nathaniel said. "They'd pull out entirely," Eleanor said. "And he'd have nothing. Not here, not in Richmond, not anywhere that matters." Nathaniel looked at her. The lamp was low. It was past midnight again, because it was always past midnight when they reached the part of the problem that mattered, and in the low light, her face was very clear and very decided. "Do you know anyone in Richmond?" he said. "My father's cousin married a man named Alderton, William Alderton. He moves in merchant circles in Richmond." A pause. "He's an honest man from everything I've been told. He doesn't like fraud. He lost money to a fraudulent land deal 10 years ago, and he has not forgotten it." "Would he talk to us?" "He'd talk to me," Eleanor said. "He's met me twice. He wrote to offer condolences after—" She stopped. "After the chapel." She said it flat and forward. "He said if there was anything he could do. I think he meant it." Nathaniel was quiet for a moment, thinking about the kind of man who wrote a genuine letter to a woman he'd met twice after a public humiliation and decided that was the kind of man worth trusting. "Write to him," he said. "I'll write tonight," she said. She pulled a sheet of paper from the drawer. She dipped her pen. She paused for just a moment, the pen held above the paper, and then she wrote clear fast every word, knowing exactly where it was going. Nathaniel watched her for a moment. Just a moment. Then he picked up the Briggs letter that Poole had quietly placed on the corner of his desk earlier, and began reading it again, looking for the specific language that would matter in a conversation with a Richmond merchant who didn't like fraud. Outside, Virginia had gone dark and still. The summer night held everything: the fields, the roads, the town where Charles Montgomery was sleeping with his plans intact and his confidence unmarked. He had no idea what was being written in this room at this hour. He had no idea who was writing it. That was the last advantage he had, and he didn't know it was already gone. William Alderton's reply arrived on a Tuesday 9 days after Eleanor had written to him. It was longer than she expected. 3 pages written in a hand that pressed hard on the paper, the handwriting of a man who meant what he said and wanted you to feel the weight of it. Eleanor read it standing in the hallway, where Nathaniel's man had just handed it to her, and she read it twice before she moved. Then she walked directly to the study. Nathaniel looked up from the mill accounts. He read her face before she said a word, and he put the accounts down. She handed him the letter. He read it. He read it again. Then he set it flat on the desk and pressed 2 fingers against it the way he did when he was holding something still, so he could think around it clearly. "He knows the investors," he said. 3 of them by name, Eleanor said. "He's done business with 2 of them directly, and Montgomery told them he had secured land access through a family arrangement." Nathaniel tapped the letter. "That's what this says. He told them the access was settled. Legally settled." "It wasn't," Eleanor said. "It was never settled. He proposed marriage, he abandoned it, and then he filed a contract with Richmond investors representing access to land he had no right to." She sat down in the chair beside the desk. "Alderton says one of the investors, a man named Carver, has already begun sending surveyors to plan the timber operation. They're expecting access within the month." Nathaniel was very still. "When did the surveyors leave Richmond?" "Alderton wrote this 9 days ago. They may already be moving." They looked at each other. "We need to contact Carver directly," Nathaniel said. "Alderton offered to facilitate that," Eleanor said. "He says if we send him the corrected deed filing and the boundary documentation, he'll personally present it to Carver. He says—" She reached over and pointed to the second page, 3rd paragraph. "He says Carver is a cautious man, a man who does not like to be caught holding someone else's bad contract. Meaning if Carver sees the documentation before his surveyors reach the boundary, he pulls out," Eleanor said. "Before his money is committed, before the operation begins, before Montgomery can finalize anything." She paused. "And once Carver pulls out, the others follow. Alderton says Carver is the money that matters. The others are following his lead." Nathaniel stood up. He went to the filing cabinet against the wall, the one Eleanor had reorganized in her first week, because the previous system had been what she diplomatically called creative, and he pulled the corrected filing and the boundary documents and the original 1809 survey. He put them on the desk. "I'll write the cover letter," he said. "You review it before it goes." "I'll write it," Eleanor said. "Alderton knows me. It should come from me." Nathaniel looked at her for a moment. Then he moved out of the chair and gestured toward it. She sat down. She wrote. He stood at the window and let her work, which she had noticed he was good at knowing when to be present and when to be quiet, which was rarer than people understood. The letter went out that afternoon. 3 days later, Poole came in from town, with a look that meant the situation had changed while nobody was watching. "Montgomery's been at the county records office," he said. Nathaniel set down his coffee. "Doing what?" "Requesting copies of deed records, specifically the corrected boundary filing and the original survey." Poole kept his voice even. "He was there for 2 hours. He brought a man with him, not one of the Richmond men. Local. Someone who knows the record system." "He's building a counter-argument," Eleanor said from the doorway. She had heard Poole's horse and come from the garden where she'd been that morning with her mother, who had taken to visiting the Carter estate, with a frequency that told Nathaniel the older woman was trying to decide something about her daughter's life and hadn't decided it yet. Eleanor still had dirt on her hands from the garden. She didn't stop to wash it. "He knows the Alderton letter is in play somehow, or he suspects we've moved on the investors. He may not know about Alderton specifically," Nathaniel said. "He knows we've done something," Eleanor said. "Otherwise he'd still be running the social campaign. He was building soft pressure before gossip, the visits to father, the approach to Daniel, the letter to Briggs. That's a man who thinks he has time." She came into the room fully. "Pulling deed records is a man who's realized the clock has changed." Poole looked at Nathaniel. "There's something else, sir." The way he said it made the room go quiet. "The something else," Nathaniel said. "He went to see Judge Harlan after the records office." Poole paused. They were together for about an hour at the judge's house, not the courthouse, the house. Eleanor's hands went still at her sides. Nathaniel's jaw tightened. Harlan handles civil property disputes in this county. Yes, sir. If Montgomery is talking to Harlan at his private residence, he's not filing a motion, Eleanor said. Not yet. He's feeling out whether the judge would be receptive to one. She looked at Nathaniel directly. He's going to try to challenge the marriage. On what grounds? Nathaniel said. And his voice had gone to the place it went, when he was past anger and into something colder and more functional. Financial coercion, Eleanor said. It's what he threatened through Daniel. He'll argue that I married under duress, that the speed of the marriage and my family's financial situation suggests I had no real choice. She held Nathaniel's gaze. If he can get Harlan to entertain a hearing, even a preliminary one, it creates the appearance of legitimacy. It tells the county that the marriage is questionable. And it gives Carver's investors a reason to pause before they pull out of the Richmond contract, because if the marriage is being challenged, the boundary filing might be challenged too. It's a delay tactic, Nathaniel said. It's a delay tactic, she confirmed. He doesn't need to win the challenge. He just needs it to run long enough for his contract to execute. The three of them stood in the study with that understanding sitting in the middle of the room. Then Eleanor said quietly, but with absolute precision, "He is not going to get to Judge Harlan before we do." They rode to Harlan's house that same afternoon. Not the courthouse, the house, because Montgomery had gone to the house, and Nathaniel was not going to let the first conversation the judge had about this situation be Charles Montgomery's version of it. Judge Harlan was 61 years old, white-haired, methodical, and possessed of a reputation for being genuinely uninterested in social performance of any kind. He had presided over property disputes in Albemarle County for 20 years, and he was the kind of man who read every document himself rather than relying on summaries. Nathaniel respected that. He was counting on it. The judge received them in his study, a room that felt like a working room because it was papers and ledgers stacked with the organized accumulation of a man who never threw anything away that might later be relevant. He looked at Nathaniel. He looked at Eleanor. He looked at Eleanor's hands, which still had faint traces of garden dirt in the creases of her knuckles, because she hadn't stopped to wash them. And he noticed the same way Nathaniel noticed things. "Carter," he said. "Mrs. Carter." He gestured to the chairs. "I expected you yesterday, if I'm being honest." "We moved as fast as we could," Nathaniel said. "Montgomery was here this morning," Harlan said without preamble, which Nathaniel had been right to count on. "I assume that's why you're here." "What did he tell you?" Eleanor said. Harlan looked at her with the particular attention he gave to people who asked direct questions. "He expressed concern about the circumstances of your marriage. He suggested there may be grounds for a petition challenging the arrangement on the basis of financial inducement." He folded his hands on the desk. He was careful to frame it as concern. He used the word well-being 4 times. "He is not concerned with my well-being," Eleanor said. "He is concerned with a land access contract he is building in Richmond that our boundary correction has compromised." She leaned forward slightly. "Judge Harlan, I want to tell you exactly what happened in the order it happened without softening any of it. And then I'd like you to look at these documents." She put the file on his desk. "And then I'd like you to tell me whether a man who does what I'm about to describe sounds like someone motivated by concern." Harlan looked at the file. He looked at Eleanor. "Go ahead, Mrs. Carter," he said. She went ahead. She told him everything. The engagement, the survey, the letter, with its 3 careful, bloodless sentences, the 3 hours on the chapel steps, the conversation at Nathaniel's estate, the proposal and its terms, and her conditions, and his agreement. She told him about the Richmond contract, and the boundary correction, and Alderton, and Carver. She told him about Daniel and the foreman's letter, and the visit to her father. She told it in order clearly, and she did not dramatize a single word of it, which made it more devastating than drama would have been. Facts in sequence with documentation attached. Harlan listened without interrupting. When she finished, he was quiet for a moment. Then he opened the file and began reading. He read for 11 minutes. Nathaniel counted. Then Harlan closed the file, sat back, and said, "If Mr. Montgomery files a petition with this court, I will require him to demonstrate specific evidence of coercion. Not circumstance, not timing, Evidence. He looked at Eleanor. A woman who negotiates her own terms, documents her own case, and rides to a judge's house. The same afternoon a threat is made, is not a woman who was coerced into anything. Something in Eleanor's face eased, not collapsed, just eased like a held breath finally let out. "I'm not telling you he won't file," Harlan said. "I'm telling you what he'll face if he does." He stood. "I'd also suggest you keep that file where you can get to it quickly." He paused at his own door. "And Mrs. Carter, next time you come from the garden, wash your hands first. It gives the right impression." Eleanor looked at her hands. Then she looked up at the judge. "I didn't want to take the time," she said. Harlan almost smiled. "No," he said. "I don't suppose you did." They were halfway back to the estate when Nathaniel said without looking away from the road, "You were extraordinary in there." Eleanor said nothing for a moment. "I was accurate," she said. "That's different." "It isn't," he said. "Being accurate when everything in you wants to be something else, that's not a small thing." She was quiet for the length of a long breath. "I wanted to say a great deal more. I know. About the chapel steps. About what it feels like to have someone calculate your worth and leave." Her voice was steady, but there was something under it. Something that had been under it for weeks, and that she had been carrying with great precision and considerable effort. "I wanted to say it and I didn't because it wouldn't have served the purpose." "No," Nathaniel said. "It wouldn't have. But it's true." "Yes," he said. "It's true." She looked at the road. He looked at the road. The horse moved steadily between them and the estate, and the summer afternoon held all of it. The truth that had been said, and the truth that hadn't, and the particular closeness of two people who have been through enough together that silence means something different than it used to. "Nathaniel," she said. It was the first time she'd used his given name without the slight formality she usually kept around it, and they both heard it. "Yes," he said. "Thank you for not speaking in there, for letting me—" She stopped. "Some men would have." "You had it," he said. "There was nothing for me to add." She nodded. That small final nod. And then she didn't say anything else, and neither did he, and the road carried them home. The letter from Alderton came 4 days later, and it came fast, riding ahead of something as it turned out. Carver had seen the documentation. Carver had called an immediate meeting with the other two investors. Montgomery had been summoned to Richmond by urgent letter that same morning. Alderton wrote, "He will know within days that the contract is worth nothing. He will know that the access he sold does not exist. He will know who sent the documentation. Be prepared." A man like Montgomery backed into a corner with nothing left to lose in Richmond will come at you directly. That is when he is most dangerous. W. Alderton. Nathaniel read the letter aloud to Eleanor Poole and Daniel, who had returned 2 days earlier, without announcement, because Daniel had apparently decided that whatever was happening at the Carter estate required him to be present for it. When Nathaniel finished reading, the room was quiet. "He's coming back," Eleanor said. "He's coming back," Daniel confirmed. "His man was seen at the Harrington Inn this morning, asking about room availability for the end of the week. He'll have nothing from Richmond," Nathaniel said. "No contract, no investors, no financial backing. He still has the land access agreement he's been building toward your father, but that's only valuable if it's signed and it's not signed." He looked around the room. "He's going to try to force a signature before we can stop it. That's his only remaining move." Eleanor stood up. "Then I need to go to my father, tonight." "I'll come with you," Nathaniel said. "No." She said it quickly, then softened the edge of it. "I need to. He responds to me differently when it's just us. When you're there, he's thinking about what impression he's making, what you're thinking of him. I need him just thinking about what I'm saying." She paused. "I know my father. Let me go alone." Nathaniel held her gaze for a moment. 3 weeks ago, he would have argued on principle, on the grounds of safety, on the grounds of strategy, on the grounds of knowing more about Montgomery's patterns than she did. He didn't argue. "Take Poole," he said. "Not to come in, just to ride with you." "All right," she said. She was out the door in 4 minutes. Daniel watched her go. Then he looked at his brother. "You trust her," he said. It wasn't accusatory, it was something closer to wondering. "Yes," Nathaniel said. "Just like that." "Not just like that." Nathaniel picked up Alderton's letter and read the last line again. "That is when he is most dangerous. She's earned it." Eleanor came back 3 hours later. Nathaniel heard the carriage and was at the door before she reached it, and he read her face in the lantern light. Not defeated, not relieved, something in between, something complicated. "He listened," she said, coming inside. "I told him everything, all of it. The Richmond contract, Carver Alderton, the boundary filing, what Montgomery is building." She sat down in the hall chair, which she'd never done before. She always walked through to the study, and the fact that she sat down in the hall told him she needed a moment. "He cried," she said. "My father. He sat at his own desk, and he cried, which I have not seen him do in 20 years. Nathaniel sat down across from her. "He signed nothing," she said. "He promised me he would sign nothing without my reading it first. He made the promise the way he used to make promises when I was small, with his hand over his heart." Her voice caught on something, and she held it. "He said he was sorry. For the debt, for the situation, for all of it. He said he was sorry he hadn't looked at the ledgers when I'd been looking at them for 2 years." The hall was quiet around them. "He meant it," Eleanor said. "That's the thing about my father, he always means it. He just doesn't always know what to do about it." "That's most people," Nathaniel said. She looked at him. Her eyes were bright with something she was not going to let fall, and he wasn't going to remark on it, and they both understood that. "Montgomery is going to come at us directly," she said. "You know that." "Yes." "What do you think he'll do?" Nathaniel had been thinking about this since Alderton's letter. He'd been sorting through the pieces of what he knew about Charles Montgomery. Not the public version. The version that attended dinners and spoke with concern and used the word well-being, but the private version. The one who had written 3 flat sentences to a woman he'd promised a life to. The one who had gone to a judge's private house. The one who sent letters to hired foremen and showed up at brothers' offices and moved quietly across a county like water, finding the lowest point. That version of Montgomery was not primarily angry. He was primarily calculating. But Alderton was right. A calculating man with nothing left to calculate, with sometimes became a different kind of man. "He'll try to make it public," Nathaniel said. "He'll try to turn whatever he has left into something the county sees, because the county is the only asset he has remaining. If he can damage us here socially, reputationally, he can at least take that with him when he goes." He paused. "The letters. Your letters. I think he'll produce them publicly." Eleanor's jaw tightened. "Where?" "Somewhere with an audience. A gathering, a social event, something with enough people that it constitutes a scene." He held her gaze. "He'll present them as evidence that you were romantically attached to him throughout this marriage, that you entered into an arrangement with me while carrying feelings for him. It won't be legally actionable, but it will be socially destructive." "If he does that," Eleanor said slowly, "I want to be ready. I want to be standing right there when he does it." "That's what I was thinking," Nathaniel said. She looked at him sharply. "You want him to do it." "I want him to do it in the right place at the right time in front of the right people." Nathaniel leaned forward. "There's a gathering at the Prestons next Friday evening. Half the county will be there, merchants, landowners, the Harlan family. Alderton is visiting next week, and I think he'd come if we asked him." He paused. "If Montgomery is going to make a scene, he's going to make it somewhere like that. So let's make sure we're there. And let's make sure Alderton is there. And let's make sure that when Montgomery produces your letters, there's someone in that room who knows exactly what they prove." Eleanor was quiet for a moment, turning the shape of it in her mind. "The letters prove I tried honestly to build a life with a man who abandoned me," she said. "They prove I asked him questions about the land and the county because I genuinely expected to live here with him. They prove," Nathaniel said, "that you were deceived, not foolish, not complicit, deceived." A beat of silence. "All right," Eleanor said. "We go to the Prestons." The week between Alderton's letter and the Preston gathering was the longest week Nathaniel could remember in years, not because of what happened in it, though things happened, Montgomery returned from Richmond on Thursday, and Poole reported that he looked tired and moved through town with the particular speed of a man who has stopped being patient. I went to the records office again. He visited 2 county merchants who had done business with both himself and Nathaniel over the years. He sent a note to the Whitfield house that Thomas Whitfield, true to his promise, forwarded directly to Eleanor unopened. Eleanor opened it. She read it. She put it in the file without expression. "What does it say?" Nathaniel asked. "That he wants to meet, to discuss a resolution that would suit all parties." She closed the file. "He says he has documents that complicate the current situation and that a private resolution would be preferable to a public one. He's telling you he has the letters." "He's telling me he has the letters," she confirmed, "and offering me the chance to pay for them before he uses them." Nathaniel looked at her. "What do you want to do?" "Nothing," she said. "We don't respond. We don't negotiate. We go to the Prestons on Friday, and we let him decide what kind of man he is." What made the week long was not the maneuvering. It was something quieter than that. It was the evenings. Daniel had stayed, and in the evenings, the 3 of them were sometimes in the parlor after supper. Daniel with whatever book he'd found on the shelves. Eleanor with the accounts or the correspondence. Nathaniel with the estate ledgers. And it was not quiet in the way the house had been quiet before. It was the kind of noise a house makes when it's inhabited by people who are actually present in it. Real noise. Chair legs and turning pages, and Daniel laughing at something he read, and Eleanor saying without looking up, "What is it?" and Daniel reading it aloud, and Eleanor's mouth pulling at one corner in a way she didn't always catch in time. Nathaniel watched that, and felt something he recognized distantly from a very long time ago. He recognized it as home. He hadn't had much occasion to use that word in 9 years. He picked up his ledger and found his place, and kept his face even, and if Eleanor noticed him noticing, which she likely did, because she noticed everything she said, nothing about it, which was, he was beginning to understand one of her finest qualities. On Thursday evening, the night before the Prestons, Eleanor came to the study after Daniel had gone up. She stood in the doorway for a moment, and there was something in her posture that was different from her usual, not uncertain. Eleanor Whitfield did not do uncertain, but something adjacent to it. "Can I ask you something?" she said. "Yes." She came in. She didn't sit down. "Tomorrow, if it goes wrong, if he produces the letters and the room turns, and it doesn't go the way we've planned, what happens to you?" He looked at her steadily. "What do you mean?" "Your reputation, your standing in this county." She held his gaze. "You've spent 20 years building what you have here. I came into it 3 weeks ago, and I've brought a good deal of difficulty. You've brought a boundary correction worth 3 years of timber income," he said. "You've brought the Alderton connection and the Carver documentation. You've kept your father from signing a ruinous agreement twice. You've argued a judge out of entertaining a fraudulent petition." He paused. "The difficulty came with Montgomery, not with you." "That's not exactly what I asked," she said. "No," he said. "It isn't." He set the ledger down. "Eleanor, whatever happens tomorrow, I chose this. I chose to turn right at that fork in the road. I chose to come back with you to Harlan's house. I've chosen every step of it." He looked at her directly. "I don't make choices I'm not prepared to stand behind." She was looking at him with that layered expression, the one he was still building the vocabulary for. "Neither do I," she said quietly. "I know," he said. "That's why I turned right." The words landed between them in the lamplight, and something in the room shifted the way it had shifted before that change in the air without a window opening that thing. He had no name for that kept happening when they were in the same space at the end of a long day, with all the practical business finished. Eleanor looked at the desk. She looked at her hands. Then she looked back at him. "Get some sleep," she said. "Tomorrow's going to be loud." "Yes," he said. She turned to go. At the door, Nathaniel. "Yes." A pause. Just long enough to mean something. "I'm glad you turned right," she said. She went upstairs. He sat in the empty study for a long time after, with the lamp burning low, and the night pressing against the windows, and the estate all around him breathing in the dark, and he thought about choices, the ones that looked small at the moment you made them, that turned out to be everything. He thought about a woman standing alone in the middle of a road in a white dress with her chin up and a torn veil in the dirt at her feet. I thought that was the moment. Not the fork in the road, not the courthouse, not any of the careful, deliberate decisions he'd made in the weeks since. That was the moment when she'd turned at the sound of his horse, and her chin had come up exactly 1 inch, and he had understood without a single word being spoken that this was a person who would not be broken if he could help it. He banked the lamp. He went upstairs. Tomorrow was going to be loud, and they were going to be ready for it, and Charles Montgomery was going to find out what he'd thrown away when he walked out of that chapel and left Eleanor Whitfield to stand in the summer heat alone. The Preston gathering was the kind of event that Albemarle County used to take the temperature of itself, not a formal ball. The Prestons weren't that kind of family, and Margaret Preston in particular had always preferred a gathering where people could actually talk to each other over one where they performed at each other across a ballroom floor. But it was large. 40 people, maybe 45, drawn from the merchant class and the landowning families and the professional men who moved between both worlds. The kind of room where a reputation could be made or broken in the time it took to cross it. Nathaniel had attended these gatherings for 15 years. He knew every face in that room before he walked through the door. He also knew the moment he walked through it that Montgomery was already there. He felt Eleanor's hand tighten slightly on his arm. Not from fear, he understood now, but from the specific alertness of a person who has spotted the thing they came prepared for. He didn't look at her. She didn't look at him. They moved into the room together with the ease of two people who had spent enough weeks in the same close quarters that they'd developed a physical shorthand, a slight shift of weight, a half step, the kind of coordination that looks natural because it has become natural. William Alderton found them within 3 minutes. He was a broad man in his 50s, red-faced from Virginia summers, and direct in the way that men get when they've been deceived once and decided never to be deceived again. He shook Nathaniel's hand. He took Eleanor's hand in both of his and held it for a moment. "Your letters change things in Richmond," he said to her quietly enough that it was just for them. "Carver withdrew this morning. Official letter. The contract is void." Eleanor's breath came out slow and steady. "All 3 investors. All 3. Montgomery received word yesterday afternoon." Alderton looked across the room to where Montgomery was standing glass in hand, speaking to Harrison Mercer, with the focused attention of a man who is performing calm. "He knows he has nothing left in Richmond. He knows we know. Whatever he does tonight, he does it with an empty hand." "An empty hand can still throw a punch," Nathaniel said. "Yes," Alderton said. "That's why I'm here." They separated Alderton moving toward a group of merchants near the far wall. Nathaniel and Eleanor moving toward the Harlans, because Judge Harlan's presence in the room was a fact Montgomery would have to calculate around, and Nathaniel wanted Montgomery to see them speak to him. Small moves. Visible moves. The kind that told a watching man exactly how the board was arranged. Montgomery watched. Nathaniel could feel it without looking. Eleanor was speaking to Catherine Harlan about something Nathaniel was not tracking, because his attention was on the room, on the 3 people Montgomery had already spoken to on the door on the position of Alderton, near the merchants on Daniel, who had arrived separately and was currently making himself agreeable to the Prestons in the way Daniel was genuinely good at. Then, Margaret Preston appeared at Eleanor's elbow. "Mrs. Carter," she said with the warmth of a woman who had decided something and wanted Eleanor to know it. "I'm so glad you came. I've been meaning to call on you. I've heard the most remarkable things about what you've done with the Whitfield deed situation. My husband says you found a survey error that's been sitting in the county records since 1809. "It needed correcting," Eleanor said. "It needed someone who knew to look for it," Margaret Preston said firmly. "That's not the same thing." She squeezed Eleanor's arm and moved on, and Eleanor turned back to Nathaniel with an expression that was quietly startled, as though kindness from that direction had not been part of her calculation for the evening. "She's been talking to people," Nathaniel said under his breath. "Apparently," Eleanor said. "Good," he said. Then Montgomery moved. Not toward them. Toward Thomas Whitfield, who had arrived 20 minutes earlier with Eleanor's mother and who was currently standing near the refreshment table, with the careful posture of a man who is trying to look comfortable and not quite managing it. Eleanor saw it the same moment Nathaniel did. "He's going to my father," she said, low and fast. "I see it. If he gets to him here." "I know." Nathaniel was already moving. "Go to your mother. Keep her on the other side of the room. Whatever happens between your father and Montgomery, your mother doesn't need to be in the middle of it." Eleanor moved without another word, angling across the room in the opposite direction, with the particular grace of a woman who has learned to cover ground quickly without appearing to hurry. Nathaniel moved toward Thomas Whitfield. I was not going to make it in time. Montgomery was closer, and he was walking with purpose, and by the time Nathaniel was within 10 feet, Montgomery had already reached Thomas and had his hand out and was speaking with the warm, measured confidence of a man who has rehearsed this conversation. Thomas Whitfield was shaking his hand. His face was doing that thing, the complicated arithmetic, the hope and the wariness trading places. Nathaniel stepped up beside Thomas. "Mr. Whitfield," he said. "Good evening." Thomas turned with visible relief. "Nathaniel, you know Mr. Montgomery." "We're acquainted," Nathaniel said pleasantly. He looked at Montgomery for the first time that evening directly, and what he saw was a man who was tired and contained it extremely well, and angry under the tiredness and under the anger, something that might have been the beginning of desperation. "Carter," Montgomery said, "congratulations on the marriage. I don't believe I've had the chance to say so in person." "No," Nathaniel said. "You haven't." A beat of silence, thin as paper. "I was just telling Thomas that I hope there are no hard feelings between us," Montgomery said. "Whatever misunderstandings may have occurred earlier in the year, I believe reasonable men can find a path forward." "Misunderstandings," Nathaniel said. "These things happen in business," Montgomery said smoothly. "Assessments change, circumstances shift. No one should be blamed for responding to new information." Thomas Whitfield was looking between them with the expression of a man watching a conversation that has more in it than the words being used. "The new information," Nathaniel said, "being that the access you sold your Richmond investors doesn't exist now, that the boundary correction has been filed and confirmed." He kept his voice exactly as pleasant as Montgomery's. "I'd call that less of a misunderstanding and more of a material misrepresentation to your investors. But I'm sure reasonable men can find a path forward." Montgomery's expression didn't change. He was good. Nathaniel would grant him that. "I wonder," Montgomery said, "if we might speak privately. I have some documents that relate to the current situation that I think would be of interest to both families." "The letters," Nathaniel said. Thomas Whitfield went still. Montgomery looked at him. "I have some correspondence that may complicate the current arrangement. I think a private conversation would serve everyone better than—" "Produce them," Nathaniel said. Montgomery blinked. "I beg your pardon. The letters, whatever you have." Nathaniel held his gaze. "Produce them now, here." "I don't think that would be—" "I do," Nathaniel said. "I think it would be exactly appropriate. You came to this gathering with something you intended to use. Use it. In front of the people who've known this family for 30 years and who can judge for themselves what they mean." For the first time, something moved behind Montgomery's eyes that was not calculated. It was fast and it was gone, but Nathaniel saw it. He hadn't planned for this. He had planned for a private confrontation, for leverage applied quietly, for the kind of pressure that works in hallways and closed studies. He had not planned for a man who would invite the scene out into the open. "I don't want to cause a scene," Montgomery said. "You already have," Nathaniel said. "You caused it the morning you left a woman sitting on chapel steps for 3 hours, and then sent investors into land you had no right to sell. The scene exists. You might as well finish it properly." The room had gone quieter. Not silent. The Prestons' gathering was too well-bred for outright silence. But the conversations nearest them had thinned, and heads had turned with the practiced subtlety of people who are listening intently while appearing not to. Montgomery looked at the room. He looked at Nathaniel. He looked at Thomas Whitfield, who was now standing very straight with his hands at his sides, and an expression Nathaniel hadn't seen from him before. Something that was past the desperate arithmetic, something older and harder. "All right," Montgomery said, and he reached into his coat. Eleanor appeared at Nathaniel's left side. He didn't know exactly when she'd come back across the room, but she was there, and she was standing the way she'd stood on the chapel steps, chin up hands, still nothing in her face that she hadn't decided to put there. Montgomery looked at her. Something passed across his face. Then that was complicated enough that Nathaniel, who was watching closely, couldn't name all of it. There was calculation in it. There was something that might have been once genuine, feeling the ghost of it anyway. And there was underneath all of that the look of a man who has just realized that the person he underestimated has been several steps ahead of him for longer than he knew. He produced 4 letters. He held them up. "These are letters written by Eleanor Whitfield to me during our engagement," he said loudly enough now that there was no pretending the nearest dozen people couldn't hear. "They demonstrate a degree of personal feeling and attachment that I believe is relevant to the question of whether her current marriage represents—" "May I?" Eleanor said. She held out her hand. Her voice was perfectly even. Montgomery looked at her outstretched hand. Then, because there was no graceful way to refuse in front of this room, he gave her the letters. She looked at them. She looked at the room. "These are my letters," she said. "I wrote them. I'll tell you exactly what's in them." She held the first one up. "I asked him what crops his family's land had historically run, because I expected to understand the land I was marrying into." She held the second. "I told him about the boundary survey I'd found in my father's records, because I thought it would matter to the man I was going to marry." She paused, looked at Montgomery. "He already knew about that survey, which is why he proposed to me in the first place." A murmur moved through the room. "I told him I hoped he would come to love this county," she said, holding the third letter. "I wrote it in good faith to a man I believed was acting in good faith." She held the fourth. "And I asked him in this one whether he intended to be the kind of husband who made decisions with his wife or for her." She lowered the letters. "He never answered that question. I suppose I had my answer the morning he sent a letter instead of a man." The room was very quiet now. "These letters don't demonstrate attachment that compromises my marriage," Eleanor said. "They demonstrate that I am a woman who does her research, asks direct questions, and expects honesty from people who have made her promises." She looked at the room, not performing, not speechifying, just looking at people she'd known her whole life and telling them the truth. "I married Nathaniel Carter because he is an honest man who made me an honest offer and kept every word of it. I did not marry him under duress. I married him because when I was standing on a road with nothing, he stopped. And then he told me the truth about why nothing had happened, which was more than anyone else did." She set the letters on the table beside her. "Do with them whatever you'd like," she said to Montgomery. "They don't say what you need them to say." The silence lasted 4 full seconds. Then Margaret Preston said clearly, and without any particular drama, "Well, that seems to settle that." And the room slowly, then all at once, the way rooms do, went back to being a room. Montgomery stood with nothing in his hands. Nathaniel looked at him. Montgomery looked back. There was no triumph in Nathaniel's face. He had checked for it internally and found it absent. What he felt was something quieter than triumph and more lasting. The specific satisfaction of a thing that was wrong being made right slowly and with difficulty through work and patience, and a woman who hadn't flinched. "You should go," Nathaniel said to Montgomery, quietly, "just for the two of them. Not just from this room, from this county. You won't rebuild what you had here. The investors know what you represented to them. Harlan knows what you attempted with him. The records show what the boundary is." He paused. "There's nothing left to hold on to here. Let go of it." Montgomery looked at him for a long moment. Then he looked at Eleanor, who was speaking to Catherine Harlan, and had already, with the particular efficiency of Eleanor Whitfield, moved on. Something in Montgomery's face did something that Nathaniel couldn't quite watch. It was too close to recognition, to the specific grief of a man who has finally understood the full size of what he threw away, and Nathaniel had enough humanity in him to look elsewhere. Montgomery picked up his coat from the chair nearby. He left. The door closed behind him, and that was the last time Charles Montgomery was seen at a social gathering in Albemarle County. Alderton found Nathaniel 20 minutes later near the window. Clean, Alderton said. "Cleaner than I expected, frankly." "She was prepared," Nathaniel said. "She's formidable." Alderton looked across the room to where Eleanor was now in conversation with her mother, who had both of Eleanor's hands in hers, and was saying something that made Eleanor's face go soft in a way Nathaniel had not seen from her before. "How long has she been managing things?" "Since she was old enough to read a ledger," Nathaniel said. "Her father's lucky she's patient." Alderton paused. "You're lucky she's patient." "I know," Nathaniel said. Alderton looked at him with the direct gaze of a man who didn't waste social niceties. "You didn't plan for her to speak, did you? You planned to engage Montgomery yourself." "I planned to let her lead," Nathaniel said. "She knew those letters better than I did. She knew what they said and what they didn't say, and how to tell the difference out loud." He paused. "It wasn't strategic. She's just better at that particular thing than I am." Alderton studied him for a moment. "Most men wouldn't say that." "Most men," Nathaniel said, "would have left her on the road." Thomas Whitfield found Nathaniel near the end of the evening when most of the guests had begun their goodbyes, and the room had settled into the warm, loosened conversation of people who have spent a satisfying few hours together. He looked different from the man who'd met Nathaniel in the Whitfield hallway weeks ago. The careful dignity was still there, but something under it had changed. Some of the holding-on quality was gone, replaced by something more like rest. "I owe you an apology," Thomas said. "You don't," Nathaniel said. "I do." Thomas looked at his hands. "I should have looked at the books. I should have listened when Eleanor tried to show me. I was afraid of what they'd say, and I let that fear cost my family, cost her more than it needed to." He looked up. "She's been managing what I wouldn't look at for 2 years, and I let her do it alone." "She's not alone anymore," Nathaniel said. Thomas was quiet for a moment. "No," he said. "She's not." He looked across the room to where Eleanor was laughing. Actually laughing. Not the careful mouth thing, but something real and unguarded at something Daniel had said. "I haven't heard her laugh like that in a long time." Nathaniel looked at her too. I hadn't heard that laugh before either. It was new. Or maybe it wasn't new. Maybe it was something that had been waiting for the right moment to come back, the way certain things go quiet in difficult seasons, and return when the ground steadies. He was glad she was letting it come back. "She's going to be all right," Thomas said, not asking, telling himself maybe. "She was always going to be all right," Nathaniel said. "She just needed room." Thomas Whitfield nodded. He extended his hand, and Nathaniel shook it, a different shake than the first one back in that hallway. This one didn't have calculation underneath it. This one was just a man acknowledging another man and what had passed between their families, and it was enough. It was Daniel who said it on the ride home. He was in the carriage with them. He'd sent his horse back with Poole and climbed in with the specific shamelessness of a younger brother who knows he's welcome and doesn't pretend otherwise, and he'd been quiet for the first 10 minutes, which was unusual enough that both Nathaniel and Eleanor had noticed it. Then he said, "She was magnificent." Eleanor looked at him. "I was accurate," she said, which was exactly what she'd said to Nathaniel after Harlan's house, and Nathaniel remembered it. "You keep saying that," Daniel said. "Like accuracy isn't its own kind of magnificent." He looked at her with the frank, uncomplicated admiration of a man who has no agenda attached to it. "Most people can't be accurate when they're afraid. You were terrified in there, and you were still precise." Eleanor was very still. "I wasn't afraid," she said. "Yes, you were," Daniel said. "Your left hand was closed the whole time." He said it gently, not as a challenge. "I watched it. You held it closed at your side from the moment Montgomery pulled out those letters until the moment you set them down on the table." A silence. "Yes," Eleanor said. Quiet. "Exactly true. I was afraid." "And you did it anyway," Daniel said. "Magnificently." She looked out the window of the carriage at the Virginia night moving past. Nathaniel could see the line of her profile, that chin, that particular set to it, that he'd been reading for weeks, and he could see the moment she let something go. Something she'd been holding for longer than this evening. Something she'd been carrying maybe since a summer morning on a chapel step when she'd thrown a veil in the dirt and told herself she was fine. Her hand in the dark of the carriage uncurled. Nathaniel reached across and put his hand over hers. Just that. No speech, no explanation. She turned her hand over and held on. Daniel looked out his own window at the dark road and said nothing, because he understood which was one of Daniel's finest qualities. He knew when a thing was happening and didn't try to be part of it. The carriage moved through the Virginia night, and the three of them rode in the comfortable, loaded silence of people who have been through something together and come out the other side. And Nathaniel thought about what Eleanor had said in the study the night before. "I'm glad you turned right," and he thought that he had never been more glad of a decision in his life. They arrived back at the estate late. Mrs. Beale had left a lamp in the hallway and food in the kitchen and gone sensibly to bed, which was exactly right. Daniel disappeared upstairs with a cheerful good night that didn't quite cover the knowing look he gave his brother on the way. Nathaniel ignored the look. Eleanor had her back to it and missed it, or didn't miss it, and chose not to acknowledge it, which amounted to the same thing. They stood in the hallway for a moment, with the evening settling around them. "Your mother," Nathaniel said. "She looked better, at the end." "She held my hands and told me I'd done right," Eleanor said. "She said my grandmother would have approved." A pause. "My grandmother threw a water pitcher at a man who insulted her in public, so I'm not sure how to interpret that exactly, but I'll take it." Nathaniel looked at her. She looked at him. And then she laughed, the same laugh Daniel had identified in the parlor. The real one, unguarded and uncontained. And it moved through the hallway like something alive. And Nathaniel found himself smiling before he knew he was doing it, which was not something he did easily, and which Eleanor noticed immediately. "You smiled," she said. "I do that occasionally," he said. "I haven't seen it before." She studied him with the focused attention she brought to everything. "It changes your face completely." "For better or worse," he said. "Better," she said. Simply, without decoration. He looked at her in the lamplight of his own hallway, in the house that had been quiet for 9 years and was not quiet anymore. And he thought about the letter in his coat pocket with its 3 flat, bloodless sentences, and the veil in the dirt, and the fork in the road, and every choice that had led to this specific moment, in this specific hallway, with this specific woman. "Eleanor," he said. "Yes," she said, already knowing from his voice that whatever came next was real. "I need to tell you something," he said. "And I need to say it plainly because I don't know any other way to say things, and because you've told me that's what you want, and I believe in giving people what they actually want." He held her gaze. "This stopped being a practical arrangement for me some time ago. I don't know the exact moment. Possibly the ledgers the first night. Possibly the fork in the road. Possibly before that on the chapel steps when you told me I could put my hat back on." He paused. "I'm not asking you to feel the same. I'm not asking you for anything. I'm telling you because you deserve to know the truth, and I've always believed in telling people the truth whether or not it's comfortable." Eleanor was very still. "Nathaniel," she said. "Yes. You said you don't know the exact moment," she said. "I do." She held his gaze with the direct she brought to everything that mattered. "It was when you came back from Harlan's house and you said I had it, that there was nothing for you to add." She paused. "I have spent my entire life in rooms where men added things when I had it, where they corrected or redirected or summarized what I'd just said back to me as though I hadn't said it." Her voice was steady, but there was something underneath it that was not steady, something that was old and long held, and just now being set down. "You didn't. You saw it. And you stepped back. And that was the moment I stopped being careful about what I felt." The hallway was very quiet. "Eleanor," he said. "I know," she said. "I know what I said when we started this, about revisiting terms." A corner of her mouth moved. "I'd like to revise them." He crossed the distance between them and put both his hands on her face, which was the least measured thing he had done in 9 years, and she put her hands over his and held them there. And neither of them said anything at all, because there was nothing left to say that the silence wasn't already saying better. Outside, Virginia breathed its summer warmth into the dark. The estate around them was settled and alive, and in the hallway of a house that had been too quiet for too long. Charles Montgomery ceased to exist as a relevant fact in either of their lives, not because they defeated him, not because they destroyed him, but because they had built something in the middle of everything he'd tried to take. And what they'd built was so much more solid than anything he'd had to offer that there was simply no more room for him in the picture. Howe was gone. They were here. And the house held them both. 3 months after the Preston gathering, a letter arrived from Richmond, not from Montgomery. Montgomery had left Albemarle County the morning after the Prestons and had not returned, which was what Nathaniel had told him to do, and which for once in his calculating life Charles Montgomery had done without argument. The letter was from Carver, the lead investor, the cautious man. Alderton had described the one whose withdrawal had pulled the others like a thread unraveling a seam. Eleanor read it first because she was in the study when Poole brought it in, and Nathaniel was out at the mill. She read it standing up the way she read things that required immediate processing, and by the time she heard Nathaniel's horse in the yard, she had read it 3 times and had already begun thinking about what it meant. He came through the study door still pulling off his riding gloves, took one look at her face and said, "What is it?" She held out the letter. He read it. Then he sat down slowly in the chair across from her. Not his usual chair, the one behind the desk, but the one beside it. Her chair, which he'd taken to using when they were working through something together. The boundary between his side and hers, having dissolved sometime in the past weeks, without either of them marking the exact moment. "He wants to meet," Nathaniel said. "He wants to discuss a legitimate arrangement," Eleanor said. His words. He says he was misled about the nature of the access Montgomery represented, and that having reviewed the actual boundary documentation, he believes there may be a basis for a genuine timber agreement, one negotiated directly with the landowners involved. Meaning us and your father. Meaning us and my father. She sat down. "He's offering real money, Nathaniel. Not what Montgomery told him the access was worth the actual timber value. The 3 times number." The room held that for a moment. "He's trying to salvage something from a bad investment," Nathaniel said. "Yes," Eleanor said. "And we'd be letting him. But we'd be letting him on our terms with documentation with a contract that actually reflects what the land is worth." She paused. "My father's 2 largest debts could be cleared entirely. What's left could be restructured over 3 years at a rate that doesn't require selling anything." Nathaniel looked at the letter again. He looked at Eleanor. "What do you want to do?" It was, she had come to understand over the past 3 months, his most fundamental question. Not what he'd decided. Not what he thought was best. What she wanted to do. He asked it the way other men asked about weather matter-of-factly, as though the answer was simply information he needed to function. She had stopped being surprised by it. She had not stopped being grateful for it. "I want to meet with him," she said. "With you. Together." She held his gaze. "And I want my father in the room." Nathaniel nodded. "Write to Carver. Tell him Thursday." She was already reaching for the pen. Thomas Whitfield arrived at Carter Estate on Wednesday evening, the night before the Carver meeting, and Eleanor met him in the hallway, with the kind of attention she reserved for things that required her full self. He looked better than he had in years. Some of the thinness was still there, but the strained quality had eased the way a rope eases when the weight it's been bearing is finally properly distributed. He had a leather satchel with him that Eleanor recognized. "The real ledgers," she said. "All of them." He set the satchel on the hall table. "I've been going through them. Every page." He looked at her. "You were right about everything, Eleanor. Every single assessment you made 2 years ago, you were right." She was quiet for a moment. "I know. I should have listened." "Yes," she said. Not unkindly, just accurately. "But you're listening now." He looked at the satchel, then at her. "I'm going to let you lead tomorrow. I want you to know that. I'll be in the room and I'll sign what needs signing, but this..." He gestured at the satchel, at the house around them, at everything the gesture implied. "This is yours. You built this. You and Nathaniel." His voice caught slightly on something, and he held it steady. "I want you to know I see that." Eleanor reached out and put her hand over her father's. "Just that. Just a moment." "Come in," she said. "Mrs. Beale made supper." Carver was a precise man in his early 60s who arrived exactly on time, shook hands with a clean grip, and sat down across the study desk from Eleanor Nathaniel and Thomas Whitfield, with the bearing of a man who had made and lost enough money in his life to be genuinely unimpressed by theater. He looked at Eleanor first. "You're the one who sent the documentation to Alderton," he said. "Yes," she said. "It was thorough," he said. "More thorough than most lawyers I've paid would have been." He paused. "Montgomery told me the access was settled through family arrangement. He was specific about that. He showed me what he described as an agreement in principle." "There was no agreement," Eleanor said. "He proposed marriage to me in order to access the land through legal relationship. He abandoned the marriage before it occurred once he had found what he believed was a faster route." She kept her voice level and factual. "He sold you access to land he had never had any right to." Carver looked at her for a long moment. "I've done business for 30 years, Mrs. Carter. I've been deceived before. I don't enjoy it." He opened his own folio on the desk. "I'd like to discuss what a legitimate arrangement might look like. One that compensates fairly, documents clearly, and doesn't require anyone to misrepresent anything to anyone." "That's exactly the kind of arrangement we're prepared to discuss," Eleanor said. She looked at Nathaniel. He looked at her. Something passed between them, that wordless shorthand 3 months deep. Now that functioned better than conversation for certain things. She opened the Whitfield ledger to the page she'd marked the night before and put it on the desk. They went to work. The meeting ran 4 hours. Carver was sharp, and he drove a harder opening position than Eleanor had expected, which she had actually expected and prepared for. So when she countered with the 1809 survey and the corrected boundary assessment and the independent timber valuation she'd requested from a Charlottesville assessor named Caldwell 3 weeks earlier, anticipating exactly this possibility, Carver looked at the Caldwell document with the expression of a man who has just recalibrated, and the negotiation moved onto ground that was considerably more honest. Thomas Whitfield spoke twice. Both times he was clear and direct and correct, and Eleanor felt something shift in her chest when he was something warm and a little complicated, the particular feeling of watching a parent remember who they are. At the end of 4 hours, Nathaniel pushed back from the desk and looked at Carver. "One more thing," he said. "The timeline. Eleanor." She slid the final page across the desk. "The first installment clears the Whitfield debt to the Harrington Bank in full. The second on this date retires the outstanding note to the Grain Consortium. What remains after both payments is freedom," Thomas Whitfield said. His voice was quiet. He hadn't meant to say it aloud probably, but it was the right word, and everyone in the room let it stand. Carver looked at the timeline. He looked at Thomas. He looked at Eleanor and Nathaniel. "All right," he said. "I'll have my attorney draw the contract." "I'll review it before my father signs anything," Eleanor said. Carver looked at her. Then he almost smiled, not warmly exactly, but with the respect one careful person extends to another. "I'd expect nothing less," he said. After Carver left, after Thomas had been settled into the guest room with more dignity than he'd carried into a guest room in years after Mrs. Beale had come and gone with coffee, and the particular satisfied expression she wore when things went correctly, Eleanor and Nathaniel sat in the study in the late afternoon quiet and did not immediately speak. It was Nathaniel who broke it. "3 months ago," he said, "you were sitting on chapel steps." She looked at him. 3 months and 11 days, she said. "But who's counting?" He almost smiled. "You are apparently." "I remember it because it was the last morning I didn't know what came next," she said. She said it simply without drama as a fact. "Every morning since then I've known. There was something to do, something to figure out, something to build. Even the hard days had direction." She paused. That morning had nothing. Just open space in every direction with no good option in any of them. And now, she looked around the study at the desk, with both their handwriting in the margins of the documents at the filing cabinet she'd reorganized in her first week, and which had never returned to its previous chaos, at the small stack of books on the corner that were hers, migrated there from the shelf over several weeks without decision or announcement. "Now," she said, "this is home." Nathaniel looked at her with an expression that was too full for one name. "Yes," he said. "It is."
Joe.
The Carver contract arrived 10 days later. Eleanor read every line. She found 2 clauses that required amendment. One that vaguely described the eastern boundary in terms that could be interpreted to include land outside the agreed timber access, and one that built in a renewal option that didn't specify terms with enough precision for her comfort. She wrote the amendments herself clearly, with the relevant survey references attached, and sent them back to Carver's attorney with a note that was polite and completely immovable. The attorney sent back the amended contract within a week. She read it again. It was correct. She brought it to her father at the Whitfield house. Thomas Whitfield sat at his own desk and read every page, all of it slowly, the way Eleanor had been asking him to read documents for 2 years, and when he finished he picked up the pen and signed his name at the bottom of each page with the firm, deliberate pressure of a man who understands exactly what he is signing. Eleanor countersigned beside him. She folded the contract and put it in the satchel and stood up. "Eleanor," her father said. She looked at him. "Your grandmother," he started. "I know," she said. "You don't have to. I do." He stood up too. He was still tall, still thin, but there was something in how he held himself that was different from the man she'd watched retreat from his own ledgers for 2 years. "She used to tell me that the Whitfield women always knew what needed doing, that the Whitfield men needed time to catch up." He paused. "I'm sorry it took me so long to catch up." Eleanor put the satchel over her arm. "You signed every page," she said. "That's a good start." He laughed, surprised into it, the way people laugh when something catches them off guard, and she kissed his cheek and walked out into the summer afternoon with a contract in her satchel and her family's land intact, and the particular lightness of a weight that has been set down after so long that you'd almost forgotten what your arms felt like without it. She didn't go directly back to the estate. She rode to the old Harrowfield chapel. She didn't plan to. Her horse made the turn on the familiar road, and she let it because she wanted to see it. Not out of grief, not out of the impulse to revisit pain, but because she had learned in the past 3 months that there were places you needed to return to with new eyes, just to confirm that what you remembered was true, and that what came after was also true, and that both things could exist without one erasing the other. She stood in front of the chapel steps. The summer heat was the same. The road was the same empty road. The chapel door was still the same weathered white that nobody maintained because nobody used it. She had thrown her veil here. She had stood here for 3 hours, believing the worst which had in fact been happening. She had been cold and humiliated and without a plan, and she had kept her chin up by sheer force of will because she was not going to let the road see her break. And then a horse had slowed without being asked. She thought about that. About the specific randomness of it, that it had been Nathaniel's horse, and Nathaniel's habit of noticing things that didn't fit the expected picture. That if he'd taken a different road that morning, or left the mill inspection earlier, or turned his collar up and looked at his boots the way some men did when they didn't want to be responsible for what they saw. But he hadn't. He had stopped. He had taken his hat off. He had said her name like it was a fact, not a question. And then he had told her the truth when everyone else was letting her believe a polished lie. She thought about what she'd felt in that moment, not gratitude, exactly, not yet. Something more guarded than that. A woman assessing a situation with no good options, trying to determine whether this particular man was another disappointment wearing a different face. He wasn't. She had known it sooner than she'd admitted it. Known it when he turned right at the fork in the road because he understood without being told what she'd be walking into if he turned left. Known it when he sat across from her in this parlor and told her the truth about the land survey, with no softening, because he'd decided she could handle it, which nobody had decided in a very long time. She stood at the chapel steps, and she breathed in the summer air, and she felt clean and complete that she was exactly where she was supposed to be. Then she heard a horse on the road behind her. She turned. Nathaniel. He dismounted and came to stand beside her, which he did without comment or question, the way he did most things that didn't require comment or question. He looked at the chapel. She looked at him, looking at it. "How did you know I was here?" she said. "Poole saw you turn off the main road." A pause. "I wasn't going to come. Then I decided I was. Why? He looked at her. Because 3 months ago I found you here alone, he said. And I've been of the opinion since then that you've spent enough time in this particular spot by yourself. Something moved through her chest that she didn't try to contain or manage. She let it move. The contract is signed, she said. I know. Your father sent word. It's done then. She looked at the chapel steps. All of it. All of it, he said. She was quiet for a moment. Then, do you ever think about what would have happened if you'd turned left at the fork in the road? Nathaniel was quiet for exactly 4 seconds. She knew his silences well enough to count them now, to know what each one meant, and this was the one that meant he was answering honestly. No, he said. I stopped thinking about that about 2 weeks in. It became I couldn't afford to think about it. The alternative was too much to look at directly. She understood that completely. I threw my veil in the dirt, she said. Right here. I was so angry I couldn't see clearly for a moment, and then I could, and then I was just still. The way you get still when you've used up all the reaction and what's left is just the truth of the situation. She paused. The truth of the situation was that I had nothing. And then you came around the bend, and the truth of the situation changed. Nathaniel looked at her. Eleanor, he said. Yes. I need to ask you something. All right? Are you happy? The question landed in the summer air between them, plain and undecorated, exactly the way he asked everything that mattered. Not are you content, not are you managing, not is this arrangement satisfactory. Are you happy? The full word, the full weight of it. She looked at him. This man who read ledgers at midnight and noticed things other people didn't notice, and stepped back when she had it, and stepped forward when she needed him, and had turned right at a fork in the road on a summer morning, because he could not at a fundamental level be the kind of man who turned left. Yes, she said, simply, completely. I am. He reached out and tucked a strand of hair back from her face, a small gesture almost automatic, the kind that comes from weeks of proximity and care that has long since stopped performing itself and just become what it is. Good, he said. That's what I needed to know. They rode back to the estate together, and the summer afternoon held them on the familiar road, the same road where everything had started, now wearing a different meaning, the way places do when enough life has happened on them. Mrs. Beale had, as was her custom, anticipated. Supper was nearly ready when they arrived, and Daniel was already at the table, because Daniel had been finding reasons to extend his stay for 6 weeks, and had apparently stopped requiring reasons. He looked up when they came in, and read something in both their faces, and grinned the wide, uncomplicated grin of a man who is entirely pleased with how things have turned out. The contract, he said. Signed, Eleanor said. Daniel put down his fork and hit the table once with his palm, a clean, satisfied sound. There it is, he said. There it is. Mrs. Beale appeared in the doorway. She looked at Eleanor. She looked at Nathaniel. She looked at the table, and then back at them, with the expression of a woman who has managed this house for 18 years and has developed reliable opinions about what constitutes a good outcome. Sit down, she said. Food's getting cold. They sat down. All 4 of them. Daniel already reaching for the bread. Nathaniel moving the candle slightly so the light was better on Eleanor's side. Eleanor unfolding her napkin with that particular efficient motion she brought to everything. Mrs. Beale disappearing back toward the kitchen with the satisfied air of a woman whose work is going well. The house was full of sound. Ordinary, unglamorous, irreplaceable sound. Silverware and conversation, and Daniel making. Eleanor explained the Eastern Boundary Clause amendment twice because he genuinely wanted to understand it, and Nathaniel correcting a detail about the Caldwell assessment that Eleanor had summarized slightly imprecisely, and Eleanor correcting his correction with the supporting survey reference, and Daniel watching this exchange with barely concealed delight. Outside Virginia moved through its summer evening. The fields were heavy with the season's work. The timber on the Whitfield land stood as it had stood for 100 years, worth 3 times what anyone would have estimated, now legally protected and properly valued, and belonging to the people it had always belonged to. And in a house that had been too quiet for 9 years, 4 people ate supper. Later after. Daniel had gone up, and Mrs. Beale had retired, and the house had settled into the particular stillness that follows a full day. Eleanor and Nathaniel sat in the study in the low lamplight with no documents between them for the first time in recent memory. Just the room. Just the two of them. Eleanor was reading a novel she'd found on the shelf that she suspected had been there since before Nathaniel's time, given the state of its spine. Nathaniel was not reading the journal he'd opened, which she knew because he hadn't turned the page in 20 minutes, and he was not a man who went 20 minutes without moving in any activity that had his genuine attention. She looked up. He was looking at her. "What?" she said. "Nothing," he said. "I'm just—" He stopped. She waited. "I'm aware," he said, "that this is not how I expected my life to look 3 months ago." "Is that a complaint?" "No." He said it immediately with a certainty that was past argument. "It's the opposite of a complaint. I'm trying to find the word for it." She considered. "Gratitude," she offered. "Larger than that." "Amazement. Closer." She set her book down. She looked at him across the lamplight. This man who had built an estate, and a reputation, and a life of careful precision, over 20 years of working alone. Who read ledgers at midnight and notice the details. Details other people walked past, and had not for a very long time let anyone sit in the chair beside his desk. "I have a word," she said. "Tell me." "Home," she said. "That's the word. You're aware that this is home." Howe was quiet for a moment. Then the thing happened to his face that Daniel had identified, and she had catalogued the smile that changed everything about how he looked, that he gave carefully and rarely, and which she had come to understand was not a small thing from Nathaniel Carter. "Yes," he said. "That's exactly it." She picked up her book. He turned a page in his journal. The lamp burned between them. Months later, deep into autumn, the Virginia land, shifting into its golden brown abundance. Eleanor stood at the window of the study she'd inherited into her own, and watched Nathaniel cross the yard below, with Poole pointing at something at the far edge of the timber property. And she thought about chapel steps and forked roads, and the specific algebra of how a life assembled itself out of choices that didn't look like much in the moment you made them. She thought about the veil in the dirt. She thought about the 3 sentences in a letter. She thought about 3 hours on a chapel step in a dress that wasn't hers anymore by the time anyone came. She thought about a man who had stopped his horse because it didn't fit the picture he expected, and had taken off his hat and had told her the truth. Behind her on the desk were 3 documents. The executed Carver contract. The Whitfield deed corrected and confirmed with the 2 acres of river frontage restored to their rightful place. And a letter from William Alderton, written in that pressing weight-bearing hand that said simply, "Richmond is quiet. Montgomery is in Georgia from what I hear. Nobody there knows much about him yet. I expect that will change as it always does with men like him. I hope you are both well. W.A." Eleanor folded Alderton's letter and put it with the others. She was well. She was considerably more than well. She turned from the window and sat down at the desk that was fully hers, now that had been fully hers since the first week she'd reorganized the filing cabinet, and Nathaniel had watched her do it with an expression that she now understood was the moment he'd begun really to let her in, and she picked up her pen and opened the ledger to the current page. The numbers were good, better than good. The Whitfield debt was clearing on schedule. The Carver timber operation was running cleanly, employing 8 men from the county, paying fair wages that Eleanor had negotiated as a term of the contract because it hadn't occurred to Carver to think about it, and it had immediately occurred to her. The Carter estate's own accounts were stronger than they'd been in a decade because 2 people working the same problem were better than 1. And Eleanor had found 3 inefficiencies in the first month that Nathaniel hadn't found because he was too close to the system he'd built to see what it was missing. He had thanked her for each of them. She had told him they were just numbers. He had said nothing is just numbers. Numbers are truth. You found the truth. That matters. She had filed that away in the place where she kept the things he said that she intended to keep forever. She wrote the date at the top of the ledger page. She wrote the day's first entry in her clear, forward-leaning hand. Downstairs, the front door opened. She could tell by the sound of it The specific weight of Nathaniel's step on the entry floor, the way he moved through his own house. His house. Their house. The house that had been quiet and was not quiet anymore. Eleanor. His voice from the hall. "Study," she called back. His step on the stairs. The door. He came in still carrying the outdoor air with him. Looked at her at the desk with the pen in her hand and the ledger open and said, "Briggs wants to discuss the north fence line. Something about the Carver surveyor's boundary markers." "Tell him Thursday," she said. "I want to look at the original placement records before we meet." "Thursday," he said. He didn't move to leave. He stood in the doorway for a moment, looking at her the way he looked at things he was glad of, with that quiet, unfussy attention that was more itself than anything decorative could have been. "What?" she said. "Nothing," he said. "Thursday." He went back downstairs. She looked at the doorway where he'd stood. She looked at the ledger. She looked at the window where the autumn light was coming in at the angle that meant the afternoon was going well. Then she wrote the next entry, and the next, and the numbers lined up true and clean under her hand, the way numbers did when someone was paying proper attention. The woman who had been left in the dirt came home to a life she had built with her own hands in a house that knew her name, beside a man who had turned right when turning left would have been easier, and she did not look back at the chapel steps, not because she had forgotten them, but because everything that had begun there had become through work and honesty, and the particular grace of two people who chose each other clearly and kept choosing something so much larger than loss, that loss no longer had room to define her. She had been thrown away. She had built something unbreakable from what remained. And that, in the end, was the only story that ever mattered.